Interview just published within the past few moments in the Washington Post online. President Bush says he's asking his new Defense Secretary Robert Gates to come up with a plan to boost the overall size of the United States military to try to meet the challenges of a long-term global war, he says, against terror. In the meantime, a short-term boost of troop strength in Iraq is being hotly debated. We have three reporters standing by. Our chief national correspondent, John King, he's here in the Situation Room. Barbara Starr is over at the Pentagon. But let's go to the White House first. Ed Henry, following what the president has just said to the Washington Post. This is a significant development that the president now saying he's ready to endorse what the military has long wanted, a bigger Army and a bigger Marine Corps.
That's right, Wolf. This is coming less than a week after the Army Chief of Staff said the military, specifically the Army, is being close to being broken, given the stretches, how it's stretched thin right now. Specifically, interesting, in this interview with the Washington Post, we don't have a full transcript, but they've just posted some key quotes, and the president says there that he has instructed his new Defense Secretary, Robert Gates, to report back to him with a plan to increase ground forces. Obviously, this is coming at a time when there's a lot of speculation about the president's next move in Iraq. Will he send a so-called surge of some 30 to 40,000 more U.S. troops? The president would not comment directly and obviously would not confirm or deny whether or not he is going to send a surge of more troops. But here he is for the first time saying he has instructed his defense secretary to increase the number of ground forces. Specifically, quote, "I'm inclined to believe that we do need to increase our troops, the Army and Marines," the president said in this Oval Office interview, quote, "and I talked about this to Secretary Gates, and he's going to spend some time talking to the folks in the building, the Pentagon, of course, come back with a recommendation to me about how to proceed forward on this idea." Specifically on the question of a surge, again, the president would not comment, but said, quote, "all options are viable." Wolf.
So if the president does go ahead with this call for a surge, another 20 or 30,000 troops, he could couple that by saying, you know what? I'm also going to increase the overall strength of the Army and the Marine Corps to make sure this surge, albeit temporary, does not break the existing active duty force in the Marines or in the Army.
Absolutely. One of the biggest challenges for the White House in trying to figure out whether they'll send a surge of troops is that in order to do it right now in the short term, they would have to extend a lot of Army tours of duty. People who are expected to come home soon, they would have to stay longer. That's obviously a difficult issue, Wolf.
Barbara Starr is at the Pentagon. Barbara, I know you've been covering this story for a long time. There have been a lot of people who have been saying, you know what? The Army, the standing Marine Corps is simply too small, given the requirements out there. I know that Democratic Senator Jack Reed, Republican Senator Chuck Hagel have had legislation to try to increase the size going back to 2003. The president going forward, apparently now, that's what he's telling the Washington Post. Give us some context.
Well, you know, Wolf, this is an issue that has been in the hallways of the Pentagon literally for months now, something that former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld been working on, that the Army and the Marine Corps have been saying for some time. They simply don't have enough troops over the long haul to carry out the war on terror. So President Bush's announcement that he is supporting now expanding the size of the permanent active duty military really comes as no surprise. That is something that the military wanted to see happen. But make no mistake, it will take years to recruit and train and get the money for all the equipment to really substantially increase the permanent size of the active duty military. That is a longer-term problem and a longer-term solution. The issue on the table right now, though, is would more troops in the near term for Iraq really make any difference?
The Joint Chiefs of Staff are opposed to a White House option to significantly increase the number of forces in Iraq unless there is a well-defined mission for those units, several knowledgeable sources now tell CNN. General John Abizaid, the top commander on the ground, has long been firmly opposed to sending more U.S. troops.
The Baghdad security situation requires more Iraqi troops, and that's the direction that we're headed right now.
The White House says no decision to send troops has been made, so there is no problem.
Well, the idea that there is a decision in a squabble would be wrong.
But one of the White House ideas calls for increasing combat forces by up to 30,000, mainly to deal with security in Baghdad. That means troop levels in Iraq could rise to the highest levels ever, perhaps nearly 165,000. The generals worry more boots on the ground might mean just more targets. Attacks by extremist elements of the Jaish al-Mahdi militia, now identified as the most dangerous group in the country, are still a major concern. The debate may be Defense Secretary Robert Gates's first test of wills.
So what you've got is a professional military that I think almost to a senior officer has said, please don't do this, but a political inclination to do just the opposite. And I think that clash between military and civilian cultures is looming to be a very, very great divide.
The Joint Chiefs also warn that the military can't handle an increase for more than a few months. And in Congress, some Democrats say it's just too late.
The time for a troop increase, larger troop increase, was about 3.5 years ago when we initially went into Iraq.
And Wolf, as we've discussed before, many generals, many experts say sending more troops, what happens if you do that and the violence doesn't ease up? Then what do you do? And many senior commanders believe now sending more troops will not be a solution unless there is also political and economic progress in Iraq. Wolf?
Barbara, thanks very much. Let's get some more perspective on what's going on. Our chief national correspondent, John King, is here. When I read this interview that just went online on the Washington Post, Peter Baker, their White House correspondent, interviewing the president, saying the president's now ready to go forward and expand the size of the U.S. military, the first thing that went through my mind was, this, in effect, is a slap at Donald Rumsfeld, because for 6 years he's wanted to do things with a so-called leaner, meaner, smaller U.S. military. He was reluctant to expand the size, even in the face of a lot of generals in the Army and the Marine Corps saying we need more ground troops.
One of the big questions in town has been, will there be real policy change when Rumsfeld goes and Gates come in? Here is more evidence that, yes, there will be real policy change. You're absolutely right. One of the whole debates about the Iraq War has been the Rumsfeld doctrine versus the Powell doctrine. The first Gulf War was fought under the Powell doctrine. Send in more troops. Whenever you send troops into battle, go with overwhelming force, so there's no question. Rumsfeld preferred the transformational military, lean or meaner, rely on technology. Everyone would say in Iraq right now that approach simply hasn't worked. By the president doing this so quickly, remember about 10 days ago we were talking about he was inclined to do this, wanted to hear what Bob Gates said about it. Bob Gates has only been on the job 24, 48 hours. So the president moving so quickly is clearly evidence that they are just reopening the books.
It's an enormous expenditure, though, to actually go out and recruit thousands of additional forces, then train them, and as Barbara accurately points out, before these guys are ready to be dispatched, it takes a while, so we shouldn't expect any overnight success.
No, this has nothing to do with the short-term challenges in Iraq. This has to do with a long-term assessment of, if you're going to have wars like Iraq and continue to have troops in Korea, troops in Japan, troops in Germany, troops in Africa, troops ready to go anywhere else around the world, you simply need more of them, because when they are in a 3.5-year and running now war, there is great strain. And as Barbara noted, it's not just the people. It will take 2 or 3 years to recruit and train them and get them up to speed. Wolf, if you talk to military commanders or a member of Congress who follows this, they say this country is going to have to spend tens and tens and tens of billions of dollars on new Humvees, new rifles, new tanks, new planes, new everything, because all of the equipment as well has been significantly stressed by this war.
What are you hearing about this apparent split or disagreement between officials in the White House and the Joint Chiefs on a surge, an additional 20,000, 30,000 troops going into the Baghdad area to try to bring some semblance of peace there?
The fact that it is being leaked, that there's a disagreement, a difference between the Joint Chiefs and the President is extraordinary, and again, I think a sign that Donald Rumsfeld has left and the Chiefs feel more emboldened to speak out publicly. From a policy standpoint, it's obviously significant. Will the President increase troops by 20,000? But look for this to have the reports of this split to have a huge political impact. I spoke to Harry Reid's office, the incoming Senate Majority Leader, just a little bit ago. He had said on the record over the weekend he would be inclined to support a surge in troops if they had a plan that he could accept. Now, given the published reports that the generals at the Pentagon are doubting this, Harry Reid's office says he is reassessing that. So look for the Democrats who say, Mr. President, you have always said from day one you rely on the advice of your military commanders. If they don't want to do this, why would you? The important footnote, of course, the President hasn't said he will do that. We do know he's just seriously considering it.
And their caveat that the generals are saying they don't want to do it unless there's a clearly defined mission that they understand and that they can accomplish, and that they're still not convinced that that mission is there.
Generals are making clear that they are asking tough questions.
Right, as they should. Thanks very much, John, for that. Jack Cafferty always asks tough questions.